Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good afternoon to those of you in Seoul. Good morning to those of you in Sweden, and good day to all of you wherever you are. My name is Ruslan Katz. I'm the political counselor at the Embassy of Canada in Seoul, and it's a great pleasure and a great honor for me to be moderating this session. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really true honor. A warm welcome and a warm congratulations to the Korean Women's Development Institute and the Swedish Institute for Security and Development Policy for organizing this very important discussion. Thank you. We have four distinguished panelists with us today. I will be introducing them later on, and I'm on a personal level very pleased to see our Korean panelists with whom I had the honor of working on similar discussions in the past. And thank you, of course, to all of you online. Thank you for showing your interest for the important discussion on women, peace and security. A very timely discussion to have it today on May 24th. As some of you may know, it's the International Women's Day for Peace and Disarmament. And so it's a very good day to celebrate and to highlight the important role and the important women's voices calling for peace and disarmament around the world. Once again, very important discussion. We will be talking today about the Security Council Resolution 13/2025, which was adopted in 2000, so over 2 decades ago, two decades and one pandemic ago. And this resolution really marked a significant highlight, a significant turning point for advancing the women, peace and security agenda. This resolution underscored how important, how crucial women's voices and women's participation are in all peace processes. This resolution made the whole world understand that to achieve sustainable peace, we require full, equal, active, and meaningful participation of women in all their diversity, in all stages of peace negotiations, peace processes, and peace and security initiatives. Since then, lots of progress has been achieved. Domestically, nationally, and globally, many countries have integrated the WPS agenda in national action plans. Many other foreign policy mechanisms have been put in place to advance this agenda. However, lots of work remains to be done, and there are still significant barriers to advance the WPS agenda. More broadly, when we think about gender equality, what we see, unfortunately, is that women continue to face rising violence, rollback of their rights around the world, and ongoing exclusion, including exclusion from important discussions on peace and security issues. We see, and this has been even reinforced during the pandemic, we see that there are systematic and organized forces opposing the realization of women's rights, hence the importance of discussions such as the one today. Our discussants today from Sweden and Korea will present perspectives on the WPS agenda from the government point of view and from the point of view of civil society. They will discuss around 4 key guiding questions. They will speak about what each country has achieved so far to advance the Security Council Resolution 13/2025, and whether any achievements deserve extra attention. They will speak about any specific concerns or challenges to advance the WPS agenda in each country and what should be prioritized as we move ahead. We will discuss about the role of civil society and what are the best ways to regularize and to institutionalize the role of civil society in the implementation and the development of the national action plans. And we will discuss about any other effective means to implement 13/2025 beyond the national action plans. Very briefly, on behalf of Canada, I would just simply say that these discussions, these issues are very much at the heart of our feminist foreign policy. We are currently finalizing our 3rd national action plan, which should be launched later this year and will span a period of 6 years until 2029. And in our 3rd action plan, we should be led by our foreign ministry with the participation of many other ministries. We plan to strengthen the role of civil society. We plan to include more partners in the implementation and monitoring of the action plan. We plan to have an expanded domestic focus, and I think we will be discussing today how it is equally important to have a domestic focus as much as global. And we'll also try to expand and address the intersections between WPS and other global issues, such as climate change, cybersecurity, disinformation, all of those issues where women's role are equally impacted and equally important. We are very pleased, obviously, to work with Korea and Sweden and other partners. Our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was in Seoul last week, and in his meeting with President Yoon, both leaders reiterated their commitment to advance women, peace and security, and more specifically, they committed to explore concrete actions to promote and advance a meaningful participation of women in defense and security, peace operations, and peace negotiations. So I'm very much, both as a Canadian diplomat and on a personal level as well, as I'm very much looking forward to this discussion, to hear your views, to hear your advice on how we can work better together, bilaterally, regionally, and globally to advance these important issues. For our audience online, at the end, there will be a Q&A session. Each speaker will speak for approximately 9 minutes, and we'll have time for a Q&A through the Q&A or the chat function on the Zoom. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ambassador Lina Sund, who will speak on the perspective of the Swedish government on the Resolution 1325. Ambassador Sund is a retired Swedish diplomat with extensive experience working for the Swedish Foreign Ministry and for the UN on issues related to peace and stability, conflict resolution, 1325, and gender equality. She currently is the chair of Operation 1325 and an active member of the Swedish Women's Mediation Network. Ambassador Sund, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I wanted just to say a few words about what has happened in Sweden in regard to equality before the resolution 1325, because already in the 1970s, the issue of equality became an important political issue in Sweden. And in 1980, the first law regarding equality between women and men was adopted, and it was followed by a number of other laws. So when Security Council adopted its resolution 1325, Sweden had already national legislation regarding equality in place. When the decision was taken to draw up a national action plan to implement resolution 1325, this was therefore done in the context of Sweden as an international actor, active in countries in conflict or post-conflict, a donor, participant in peace missions, doing advocacy for women, peace and security in the EU, UN, etc. And this focus was underlined by the fact that the Security Council has no mandate per se to deal with equality. That is a matter of the General Assembly. So for the Security Council, the focus on women was due to its belief that women had an important role to play in the quest for peace. So the focus of the first Swedish action plan was primarily on women as actors. Women should be part of peace missions, including as leaders. Women in conflict countries should be part of their own peace processes. The third plan, which is the one valid today, has 4 focus areas, quite similar to the first ones, but it has also added the issue of prevention of conflict, which was not so much focus of the previous one. And it also, in addition to focusing on women as actors and protection, it also talks about strengthening a gender perspective and expertise in efforts for peace and security. The present plan which was actually supposed to go up to 2020, but which has been extended, highlights more than before the role of Swedish embassies, including their development cooperation departments in conflict countries. In conflict countries, the action plans should be an integral part of the development cooperation, and the cost of that should be part of the budget allocated. So what has been achieved? In a certain way, one can say that the work to develop the plans has been an achievement in itself. It has brought together government ministries such as Foreign Affairs, Defense, Justice, and others, as well as many relevant agencies, SIDA, Development Cooperation, Folke Bernadotte Academy, Peace and Security, the Defense Force, the National Police, etc. And it has also, the process has also included civil society, which has also been good to get that aspect into the plans. Evaluations have shown that while specific objectives and targets have been set in the plans, they have not clearly identified which organizations, ministries, agencies, etc., that should be responsible for the implementation. The greater responsibility given to embassies in conflict areas in the third plan is, I believe, one way of allocating responsibility. During the last year, I have participated in some aspects of the work of the Swedish embassy in Khartoum, where the WPS is, or at least has been, due to, we don't know now, due to the situation, a major focus area for the embassy and the development cooperation. I think the involvement of embassies and the use of country allotted development aid is an achievement. I think another achievement with the action plans in Sweden is that it has helped to make agencies, including the Defense Force and the National Police, aware of WPS. The work on the action plans has also helped mobilize civil society and given civil society a way to influence. Several civil society organizations have also used the action plans as one element in their information work to the Swedish public regarding the WPS agenda. When the first Swedish action plan was adopted in 2006, Sweden did not have a feministic foreign policy. I believe the adoption of that policy strengthened the focus on the WPS agenda, and thus also on the action plan. However, the unfortunate abandonment of the feministic foreign policy does not have to result in less importance for the WPS agenda and the national action plan. That is something that, what will happen to this is something that remains to be seen. National action plans are important parts of the implementation of Resolution 1325 and the WPS agenda, but that agenda can be implemented also outside the action plans. As a matter of fact, it must be. In international efforts, peace missions, etc., there will have to be agreement on one joint plan. Each and every country involved cannot be guaranteed that everything in their action plans will be part of the work. For a peace mission, the mandate is given by the Security Council after proposals by the Secretary General. Nowadays, WPS is part of the mandate. It is therefore important that governments continue to show the Security Council and the Secretary General that the issue is important. And I believe it is essential that civil society do not allow their government to forget and put appropriate pressures on their own governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. You have raised many important points about how important the process of developing a NAP is key in itself, and how it is important to have a proper system of monitoring and assigning roles and responsibilities and raising awareness. You have finished your presentation with an appeal to the civil society, a key actor in the whole process of National Action Plan, which leads us to our next speaker, Ms. Line Hertzström, will speak on behalf of the Swedish Civil Society Perspective. She is the director of the policy and advocacy at IKFF, the Swedish branch of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the WILPF, where she has been for more than 10 years, focusing on feminist security policy, gender equality, and disarmament. She was previously the European regional rep for WILPF and is also a fellow with the Swedish Institute. Ms. Hertzström, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you, Lena, for providing a great backdrop for my presentation on the civil society perspective. And thanks to everyone who's chosen to listen on this important day. So we've gotten some fairly specific questions about the implementation and work around the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and Resolution 1325. So I will dive into certain specifics and maybe not provide the great overview, but that's quite available to everyone to find if you're looking for it elsewhere. So like Lena was saying, the work did not start with Resolution 1325. The resolution in itself was the result of a lot of civil society and work by allied states to actually get the agenda in place. And WILP was a big part of getting that done and making that happen alongside others. And that decade-long work will continue with the implementation. So the plan, the resolution is not the end goal. It's a tool that we can now use to move the agenda further on. The resolution isn't perfect either, but now that the development has taken a turn towards maybe more, we're seeing more conflicts, we're seeing militarization of the agenda, which I'll get back to. It's really great that we have this resolution to remind us that the purpose is actually peace and security through gender equality. So what we in WILP usually say, which I think is key to implementing Resolution 1325, is that we don't want gender equal wars. We want gender equal peace. And that's key. Because we're seeing a lot of militarization of the women, peace and security agenda. And that is one of my main concerns with the implementation and problems that the agenda is facing. We're also seeing that it risks being used for pinkwashing of military strategies and military operations. NATO is an example of this. They're doing a lot of women, peace and security work, or gender, peace and security work, as is sometimes said, which tends to focus a lot on the participation pillar, on integrating women into militarized organization, into militarized decision making, and even into private security sometimes. And this risks taking us towards the gender equal wars and forgets about the prevention pillar, which is what we really should be focusing on, because if we can choose to act to prevent armed conflict, then everybody wins. Then we need less protection, which is another key pillar in the agenda. And we have a lot more resources to focus on participation if we're not immediately involved in armed conflict or militarized structures. Which brings me back to some other issues that I've been seeing in Sweden right now. Like Lena said, there's been a process for a few years now to renew or to write a new national action plan. And there was the pandemic, of course, but another reason that this work has been lagging is due to under-resourcing from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It has been a priority, and a lot of the individuals working on this have done great work. But as soon as something urgent happens, and not to say that it's not urgent, but it's a way of describing things as taking priority over others. People working on the Women, Peace and Security Agenda National Action Plan have been snatched away from that work to contribute to other important work. So we saw this, we were getting started in Afghanistan. We were getting started on working on the new action plan after the pandemic, when the Taliban took over in Afghanistan in 2021. And then, of course, we needed, or the government needed, people to work on the agenda in relation to that. And then we started to build up the work again, bring in some new people, and then Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. And again, the work got sidelined. And this is a problem because it counters the essence of the agenda. Because the point is that the agenda should be there always. We should always have equal participation in decision making and in discussions on peace and security. And that means that we need more people who are able to do this. And it means that we can't push it to the side every time something else happens. That should be an opportunity for us to actually advance on the work and see, okay, how do we make this work together? How can we use what we know from the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and to make better plans to improve the work that we're doing on peace and security now, for instance, in Eastern Europe. So those are some of the issues. How am I doing on time? Sorry, I had a timer, but I forgot to start it. Yeah. With regards to civil society participation, it's like Lena again presented, it's been a very good part of the process where we've been having a lot of active cooperation, both with the MFA, who are drafting plans and in charge of its implementation, but also in a working group where civil society and the implementing agencies have been able to meet and exchange learnings and experiences, best practices, talk about problems. And this has been a great opportunity, but it's not formalized. So we're always a bit afraid of losing this working group in this arena as soon as somebody from the MFA, government, or other instances don't want it anymore. And we're actually seeing this right now, because previously, when there's been drafting of action plans, we have been very active in the actual write-up of those. But we have not been able to even see the draft this year, this time, which we are very skeptical of. So we want this group to be standardized. And also because right now, a lot of the work hinges on quite a few individuals, also from the government agencies. There are great people in the agencies that are working on this, but there's not really a mechanism for transferring that knowledge should they change positions or due to internal reshuffles or what could happen. Which again brings us back to the important role of civil society, because we are the institutional memory in this work. And that's a very important factor that I think is quite often neglected. Diplomats are often very experienced in a lot of things, and they dive into the work and they are fully focused on what they're doing right now. And then they get moved to someplace else while we stay put and remember what happened the 3 years before, or the 3 years before that, or the 3 years before that. So that's another reason that civil society needs to be in these working groups and processes to keep us on track. And I could probably talk for 20 minutes about what civil society does in this, but I wanted to go to the last question also about what else we can do than national action plans, which I just thought was an interesting question. A lot of things can go into national action plans, of course. So A lot of things can be covered, but maybe they shouldn't also be that detailed. So I wanted to mention that states can always support funding for organizations that are doing work on women, peace and security, because they are always underfunded and under-resourced. But there are also other things that states and embassies can do, such as support visas and visa processes for traveling, provide invitations to important meetings, or meetings that we don't know yet if they will be important or not. Support in multilateral forums. We have been seeing a pushback on gender equality for a long time now, and for states to keep standing up for that is increasingly important, and also to stand up for peace and conflict prevention. And there's something as boring but still important as better planning. The UN, for instance, can start planning in a bit more transparent way to actually enable women and feminist activists who are working on the women, peace and security agenda to be able to participate in meetings, in the Security Council 1325 debates, for instance. Because if you have visa requirements that are hard to meet, if you have funding issues, it's hard to go to New York on a short notice. So these are quite simple things that we can do. And the final thing that is always supporting the women, peace and security agenda is to work for disarmament. That's a key part of conflict prevention. It's trust building, and weapons are violence multipliers that will make gender equality work a lot more difficult, whether through nuclear deterrence practices or small arms and light weapons being used to threaten and intimidate and kill women human rights defenders. So that's the other big thing that can be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You've made lots of very important comments, and I think and hopefully we'll have some time at the end to get back to this concept that WPS has so many different pillars: prevention, participation, and you made a very important point about that the goal is peace. So I think we'll need to keep this in mind, and I also hope that we can maybe have some time at the end to discuss how to ensure that WPS is mainstreamed across all policy work and not only seen as a nice thing to have when there are no other urgencies. I think that this is a struggle that we all face, that WPS is often sided when other issues can become a higher priority. So thank you very much. Let's now go with our distinguished Korean panelists. And the first one will be on behalf of offering the South Korean government perspective. It will be Dr. Ji So-yoon, Director of the Center for International Development and Cooperation at the Korean Women's Development Institute, one of the co-organizers of today's discussion. Dr. Yoon published widely on women's political representation, gender and political behavior, and policy advocacy in South Korea and Japan, where she also taught. This year, Dr. Yoon leads a research team that will evaluate the implementation of the South Korean National Action Plan and suggest ways to advance the WPS agenda in the future, a project commissioned by the South Korean Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. Dr. Yoon, up to you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. As the first South Korean speaker, I would like to begin by giving you a very brief overview of South Korea's 1325 NAP that we first adopted it in year 2014, and we're currently on our third NAP. And that the other thing is that I am here as a speaker representing the state's perspective on this, but in fact, I don't represent this state per se. I work for a Korean Women's Development Institute, which is government affiliated think tank under the Prime Minister's office. But what we do is that we do a lot of policy related research, and that for every NAP released so far in Korea, KWDI has been involved in doing the background research prior to the release of every single NAP. We've done research commissioned by the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, which is the ministry that oversees the implementation process, to evaluate previous versions of NAP and then to suggest ways for future versions of the NAP. And so that's what we do at KWDI. And then finally, I would like to also mention that an important characteristic of South Korea's NAP is that it's both inward and outward looking. And this word I have mentioned in writing previously in something that I've published with a colleague at ISDP, that this is really interesting because our NAP, we promised to expand the support for overseas women in conflict by committing to expand international development cooperation or humanitarian aid for women in conflict. But at the same time, within our NAP, we address issues that are relevant to South Korea, like providing support for Korean victims of slavery during sexual slavery during World War II, and also highlighting the importance of fostering inter-Korean cooperation between North and South when it comes to women, peace, and security. So we're both, our NAP is both domestic and international in this regard. So what have we achieved so far? I think there are several that we could mention, but mainly I would like to outline two. One is expanding the scope of women, peace, and security agenda in both breadth and depth. And the second is strengthening the monitoring and transparency aspect. And so what do I mean by this? Well, in our first National Action Plan, 8 government ministries were involved, and they developed over 70 policy strategies that are relevant to women, peace, and security agenda across the 4 major pillars of prevention, protection and relief, participation, and recovery. And then in the second National Action Plan, implementation and monitoring was added as a separate pillar. And in addition, efforts were made to institutionalize the women, peace, and security agenda by revising our existing law, which is Gender Equality Basic Act, and mandating the Prime Minister's office, specifically Gender Equality Council within the Prime Minister's office, to deliberate and coordinate matters related to the 1325 National Action Plan. And in the current third National Action Plan, the Women, Peace, and Security agenda expanded even further by strengthening efforts to localize the agenda in the South Korean context by addressing issues concerning women, peace, and security on the Korean Peninsula. And in addition, in order to effectively implement the National Action Plan, our current NAP mandates each government ministry to hold annual monitoring meetings jointly with representatives from the civil society. But I will talk about this a little bit more later in my discussion. So what are then some concerns or challenges? I think the major one is that despite us being on the third NAP, I think still there is very limited awareness of the women, peace, and security agenda within the country, among the public, both the public and also among the government officials. So government officials outside the ones who directly engage in the agenda, I think it would be fair to say that people barely know about women's peace and security. And even serious problem is that there is very little agreement that this is an important agenda and a pressing concern. And this makes it very difficult for women, peace, and security to become a central part of any government's core priorities. About the involvement of the civil society, I think there have been efforts to make 1325 more inclusive. So it's not like nothing has been done, but nevertheless, civil society's role in drafting, implementing, and monitoring the NAP is still very limited. And so, like I said, our current NAP states that each government agency should hold an annual monitoring session with civil society representatives. And this is a really big progress because previous versions of NAP did not include a mention of independent monitoring sessions outside the government-wide session organized by Ministry of Gender, Equality and Family. So yes, we are improving in that regard, but still representatives from civil society groups may be included in the consultation body, but this does not mean that they can actively set and implement goals and agendas of their own. And it also does not mean that there is a clear feedback loop that guarantees civil society's opinions are reflected in the drafting and implementation process. But research shows that civil society plays an important role as important advocates, and that they can function to raise awareness of the women, peace, and security agenda. And in this regard, I think it's important for the South Korean government to find ways to support civil society, to build expertise, and to find ways to be more inclusive, to find spots for them in the dialogues. And this kind of movement would be an important step forward. Are there any effective means to implement 1325 beyond national action plans? As I said, because South Korean NAP is characterized by its inward and outward looking character, I would like to answer this question from both perspectives. And so internationally, I think incorporation of women, peace, and security agenda within the greater gender paradigm endorsed by the government would effectively promote the agenda as a part of government's comprehensive international strategy. So an example that I could think of is national action plans developed in other countries that are connected to their other international policies and strategies on gender equality, such as the feminist foreign policy or international gender equality strategies that some other countries have. And so such an effort is important in publicly declaring that the government's will and commitment to advance the women, peace, and security agenda. But South Korea has yet to develop such a comprehensive international policy or strategy on gender. And then domestically, I think an effective strategy could be developing or adopting a local action plan. And international research so far shows that local action plans are effective means to advancing national action plans, although not many countries so far have local action plans. And so why is this relevant in Korea? Well, in Korea, there has already been some kind of discussion on this, particularly within the Gyeonggi province. And Gyeonggi province is one of our provinces bordering North Korea. And it's known that 20% of the territory in Gyeonggi province is categorized as military protection area. And as such, peace has inevitably been a primary concern to local citizens. And there are several issues relevant to women, peace, and security agenda in this province. For instance, this is the province where a high percentage of female North Korean defectors choose to live once they come to Korea. And this is, and also another issue is the protection and rehabilitation of women in red light districts near military bases in the Gyeonggi province. And so there are issues, relevant issues locally that need to be addressed. And like I said, we have seen some advocates mobilizing for the adoption of local action plans. So the discussion has started, but so far we don't have a local action plan in South Korea yet. The discussion has started, but in terms of the adoption of local ordinance to set the foundation for the women, peace, and security agenda within the province, or mandating local government to regularly collect evidence on issues concerning women, peace, and security agenda locally. I mean, there are still issues to be addressed, and so hopefully we'll see more advancement in the future in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Yoon. Also, lots of very important points about how the WPS agenda is a key component both of the foreign policy, but also of key domestic policies. And thank you for raising the localization of the WPS National Action Plan. I think that this is something that many of our countries have to do more work on to integrate it more effectively in our domestic engagement. Moving on to our last distinguished panelists, very happy to have with us Ambassador Young-Suk Cho, Chair of the International Solidarity Center of the Korea Women's Associations United, and a representative of the Gender Equality Training Platform. Ambassador Cho has been involved in negotiations since 2014 on the 1325 National Action Plan, and has been a member of the Joint Committee of the NAP with the Minister of Gender Equality and Family. And Ambassador Cho also served until quite recently as Korea's ambassador for gender equality. The floor is yours, Ambassador Cho.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. And thank you for Dr. Yoon. So the broad and comprehensive explanation about the Korean NAP. Based on her explanation, I can follow mostly the NGO perspective. I would elaborate some point about the UN Security Council 1325 NAP in Korea. Basically, so far, there are two advances related to UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in South Korea. The first is that the women's leadership on the Women, Peace, and Security agenda was recognized. And second is that the Women, Peace, and Security agenda has been institutionalized as a foreign and security policy since year 2014 through this 1325 NAP. As is well known, since the 1980s, Korean women's organizations have raised the issue of Japanese military sexual slavery during World War II and urged the international community to resolve the issues of wartime sexual violence against women. And the movement to restore the right of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence soon led to a women's peace movement that called for disarmament, denuclearization, and sustainable peace negotiations in Northeast Asia, especially in the two Koreas. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, adopted in the year 2000, became known to women's organizations as a catalyst for women's peace movement. In particular, Denmark's first adoption of the 1325 NAP in the year 2005 raised the need for NAP adoption in South Korea. But the government has not accepted the demand for nearly a decade after that. Finally, in year 2014, the government held a one-year-long official meeting with the CSO to create the NAP in response to the demand of women's organizations. And the first 1325 NAP began after that. So based on that, background, the integration of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda into foreign and security policies is a great achievement, I can say. But it has been criticized for its poor content, lack of implementation, and above all, lack of willingness of government to implement the NAP. Let me elaborate on three concerns and challenges. The first concern raised is that the scope and the content of the agenda in the NAP, regardless of the relevant policy areas at home and abroad, are too limited to fully cover the UN Security Council Resolution 1325. For example, the CSO argued that the NAP's protection pillar should include not only Japanese military sexual slavery during World War II, but also survivors of camptown prostitution prevalent under Korean government control at US military bases after the Korean War, but government refused to accept it. However, recently, South Korea's Supreme Court ruled that the state is responsible for compensation, recognizing survivors of women in prostitution at U.S. military bases as victims of state violence. Therefore, I believe that they should be included in the protection and support of the upcoming fourth NAP. The next concern raised is the government's lack of commitment to implementing NAP. From the outset, the CSO suggested that each department responsible for implementing the NAP should allocate a budget and submit a women, peace, security focused action plan. However, most plans were non-budget projects, and it was common to report already in place in relation to other already existed gender policies as if they were new women, peace, and security projects. Therefore, I believe that an action plan that includes independent budget allocation should be institutionalized. The last and most important challenge is the need to strengthen the implementation monitoring system. The implementation report submitted by each ministry was, as I already mentioned, only a ritual report that was a list of planned projects. So there was no way to evaluate whether the WPS agenda was actually incorporated into each ministry and how effective the policy was. Of course, the CSO representative, including myself, raised the issue of the government and CSO joint monitoring committee, which is held only twice a year and only for 2 hours, could not properly monitor the implementation. However, the format of the committee meeting has not changed over the past decades. Therefore, I think it is necessary to institutionalize an independent monitoring system led by CSO with authorities and budget so the CSO can actually monitor, evaluate, and feedback on implementation. How can civil society involved in 1325 NAP be regularized? These questions has also been raised by Korean women's organizations for the past decade. In fact, women's organizations that participated in the NAP draft meeting expected that the government and the public's awareness would improve after the implementation of the NAP, strengthen their responsibility for implementing the WPS agenda, but these expectations turned into disappointment over time. Throughout the negotiation process, even the policies included in the NAP were never prepared for implementation, and sharing the result of implementation was only a very brief and formal report to the meeting. Sadly, this poor implementation has continued without much change so far. It is a really shame, but the timing of the first, second, and third NAP implementation until now has been consistently repeated with disappointment, resulting in frustration of expectations. Even worse, the new government took office last year. The third NAP Joint Review Committee has not been held yet. Therefore, for the smooth discussion and implementation of the upcoming fourth NAP, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which has a history of dialogue and negotiation with women's organizations in the early days of creating NAP, needs to play an active role again. And in this process, it is necessary to provide an environment for women's organizations to restore trust, which is to conduct a result-based performance assessment of NAP implementation and to share evidence-based data and information with the CSOs. And the starting point for the Korean government to properly prepare for the fourth 1325 NAP is to institutionalize an implementation monitoring system that guarantees CSO's reading role, which remain an unfinished task from the beginning to the present, including the materialization of independent review system with the budget. As mentioned earlier, Korean women's organizations have developed their capabilities by leading inter-Korean women's peace talk for the first time in the early 1990s when military confrontations between the two Koreas still persist. Since the beginning of the NAP discussion, Korean women's peace activists have raised women peace security issue internally, including the nuclearization of Korean Peninsula, suspension of armed trade, reduction of defense budget, and expansion of inter-Korean peace talk and exchanges. And today, May 24th, they continue its history by holding an event to commemorate the International Day for Women, Peace and Disarmament, calling for the denuclearization, disarmament, and an end to military tension in Northeast Asia. As we are witnessing now, inter-Korean dialogue has been suspended under the current administration, and questions are raised about what role the NAP could play in the face of escalating nuclear threat and military tension on the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia. South Korea's NAP is not expected to be a venue to intervene, mediate, and resolve conflict in the women, peace, and security crisis today, as it was not originally considered a venue for resolving all the security issues such as disarmament, denuclearization, and military tensions. There are a few aspects of a preventive as well as participatory approach to ensure the role of women as mediators and facilitators for peace building in the conflict processes. Therefore, if the NAP is not reorganized to allow women to become peace mediators in the face of rising military tensions on the Korean Peninsula in the future, the NAP has a clear limit to being a device that can implement UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on the Korean Peninsula. Unfortunately, most women's peace activists do not expect the fourth NAP to be a window of opportunity to practically implement UN Security Council Resolution 1325 fully. The reason is that the current government has declared that it will abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, which has overseen the implementation of NAP, and has not held any talk and consultation with the women's organizations advocating women, peace, and security issues. Under these circumstances, it is very unclear whether the fourth NAP implementation process can be carried out properly or whether consultation with the CSOs that existed can continue. I would rather raise the last question, given as my last answer. Are there any other effective means to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1325 beyond the NAP? Honestly, I don't know what to say. It's hard to imagine that the government will consult with the CSO to ensure the effective implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 beyond the NAP in a country where the government is in power, which argues that there is no structural gender inequality. Indeed, with the current administration halting all previously functioning dialogue and consultation, it is difficult for women's organizations to find a solution to the current women, peace, and security crisis through the NAP. So I would like to end my remark by saying that women's groups are still struggling to find a way to solve the women, peace, and security crisis through UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Cho, for this thoughtful presentation and raising many important issues, not in South Korea, but many of them affect many other countries as well. We do have a little bit of time for questions, and in fact, there is a question in the Q&A to which you, Ambassador Cho, you have partially already addressed in your presentation. It is about how does WPS, in practical terms, can help to achieve nuclear disarmament in the current regional and global environment. And you have spoken about the importance of women in peace mediation, peace negotiations, and in fact, in all security and defense policy making. And I was just maybe anyone else on the panel would like to offer any additional remarks about how WPS can help to achieve disarmament, including on the nuclear side of things. Maybe Ambassador Sund, not to put you on the spot, but with your extensive diplomatic experience, would you have any insights to offer, perhaps?
Okay, well, actually, I do believe, in general, that women's organizations all over the world and international and so on have been very active on these issues. And so in that context, maybe. But at the same time, and I'm sorry to say this, but not all women are actually, do actually see disarmament as the main thing. I think all women, or all human beings probably would like to avoid wars, etc. But exactly how you focus on how to solve the wars, I think, varies. For example, I have worked a lot in Africa, and there, unfortunately, very often it is seen as the only way you can actually defend your community is with weapons. So I'm not saying that that is a good thing, but I just wanted to say that it is more complicated than to say all women want. When it comes to nuclear nuclear weapons, etc., I presume there is a vast majority, but then there are other geopolitical issues there which are really difficult to tackle. So sorry, I couldn't be more optimistic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is indeed a very, very complex issue, but excellent question. Thank you for your answer. We have another very good question. What can Sweden learn from the Korean efforts towards the WPS agenda and implementing the national action plans, particularly regarding the Korean inward and outward looking nature of the NAP? And I think it's a good question because we are very much, all of us, we are learning from each other. I'm learning a lot from you as well. So maybe perhaps from one of our Swedish panelists, from what you've heard today, any things you would like to bring back to your own NAP mechanisms? Maybe Ms. Herström?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy about this question because this is one of the things that I cut from my presentation due to the time constraints. But we have in civil society been lobbying very hard for Sweden to have a more inward-looking approach as well, because one of the things that you maybe picked up on during these presentations is that in Sweden, we're talking about the Ministry for Foreign Affairs as the responsible ministry, whereas in Korea, it's the Gender Equality and Family. And this is a pattern that we can see sometimes, whether it's a Western versus global South perspective or just a general how do we perceive ourselves as actors in the world perspective, where Sweden has kind of neglected to look inwards and put the women, peace and security agenda as a problem to be fixed elsewhere. And we in civil society don't agree with that, at least WILP. And for instance, the Kvinna till Kvinna Foundation that we work with on this does not agree. We have a lot of work left to do internally as well. And while the National Police Department, for instance, and the Coast Guard and such agencies are actively involved in the implementation, it's only their international departments that are part of the work, and the vast majority of staff and operations are not at all affected by the NAP or the agenda. And we want to change that. It's, for instance, refugees that are coming to Sweden that could be that would be affected by work on the agenda, and that could provide serious inputs, but also, of course, the behavior of Swedish agencies here and abroad. Sexual assault and harassment is still a big trouble within the Swedish Armed Forces, for instance, and the WPS agenda should be applicable there. Even though, again, I don't want it to be used to just enable women to become militarized. Like Lena said, women does not equal feminist nor peace activist. So we need to change these things in tandem, in parallel. We need women to be included, to be equal with the positions of men, but we also need to make sure that that does not mean that women become militarized. We need to demilitarize the entire societies and make, again, gender equal peace. I hope that answered the question, at least some, and then we'll have to see about the NAP.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned in my little intro as well, in our third national action plan, we're also looking to increase the domestic looking side of the NAP. Ambassador Sund, you would like to add a comment?
Yes, thank you very much. Sorry to come back, but I mean, I do agree a lot with what Lina has said. So, but I wanted just to say one thing, and that is that the issue of sexual violence or even prostitution, etc., that is included in in this context, also with the national police and with the armed forces. So that I think is taken care of. Then I also agree that there can be a lot of things. Lina gave good examples of where it could be applicable. But I think compared to South Korea, I think one should also keep in mind, not that we do not have issues where we could apply the NAP, or have included in a NAP, but South Korea is, after all, neighbor with a country where there is no peace, really. So it is a little bit, I think, of a more clear situation for South Korea to have this inward and outward. But I think it is also a good example for us in Sweden to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, we talk about WPS, but we need to talk about how do we define all of the different pillars and how do we adapt the realities of the WPS agendas to domestic and regional realities. We are running a little bit out of time, but what I would like to address, we have another question which I think is also very important and relates to what you've said a little bit, Ms. Herström. It's about how do we deal with peaceful masculinities? And I think how do we engage men and boys to be advocates and to be supportive and to be active in advancing gender equality in general and WPS in particular? Any experience any of you would like to share? Gender equality and masculinity is a controversial issue here in South Korea, but not only. And I think many of our countries are trying to make efforts to address toxic masculinity and to bring men and boys on the side of being actors and to being advocates and champions for gender equality as beneficial for the whole society. But any views, and perhaps maybe Ambassador Cho, you've been ambassador for gender equality. How would you see the role of men and boys in this issue?
Yeah, I totally agree. The peaceful masculinity. So because Korea's experience, the current experience, the so-called gender conflict is actually originated from the military culture, because we've been experienced the colonization and war and the rapid industrialization and high competition amongst our peoples, especially the young men under 30. The age group 30, they obligated to, do the military service. It's a mandatory service, military service. So through the 2-3 years of their whole life, they experienced the militarism. So that brought actually the division of the, women who were very fastly, actually aware of gender perspective, and the men normally experience the militarism and military culture in their, age 20, or youth, time. So that actually the totally, different, experience of their life, brought the, conflict in, because of this is a kind of, gender. It's rather than the, gender, crash, but the cultural crash, but two, genders, basically. So I think we haven't got much focus on how we, actually change the, men toxic and negative, aggressive, masculinity into the peaceful and positive, masculinity. So, so that can be a kind of what the highest, actually highly actually recommended task we've been discussed for the NAP in the future. So normally we amongst the Korean, we used to say that we need to learn from the Swedish model. Their gender equality and their gender culture is much better than us. Those actually saying we actually discussed, but so in that sense I hope to actually listen and learn from how you deal with this masculinity in your own gender equality policies. So because I think that we failed to deal with those issues so far. So is it Ambassador, soon, do you have any, actually examples on experience on that?
Maybe a brief 1-minute comment, Ambassador Sund, on this?
Well, actually, it's interesting that you raised this thing, because I think we are actually seeing more maybe of this negative masculinity as you were talking about. So it is certainly not solved in Sweden. But just another thing, if we're not talking just masculinity, but if we're talking about wanting men also to become champions of implementing the WPS agenda, which is another aspect of it. There, I think I have some example. I won't have time for that, but I think that particularly in international context, etc., when men and military generally then see how useful it can be to actually also cooperate with women, that is a very good, I think, realization for them. And that has made, I think, some of these men as champions for the WPS agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid this is the time we have, but I think we could have continued this discussion for a much longer time. There are many issues which have been raised which would deserve another series of webinars about WPS, about how to mainstream WPS in our foreign policy and in our domestic policy, about how to engage men and boys to be champions, but more broadly, how to make everyone realize that gender equality is beneficial for the whole society, not only for the women, but men and everyone really benefits from a society which is more resilient and more cohesive and more equal. Thank you very much once again to our panelists. Thank you very much to the organizers. Thank you also to the participants. I hope that this webinar helped to raise awareness. Some of you have spoken about how it is important to raise awareness about those issues, even outside of the circles of government and experts. So I hope we'll have other opportunities for bilateral and global discussions on this and more fora to collaborate. Thank you very much once again, and looking forward to the next opportunity. Thank you. Have a great day.